The difference between a complex and a simple or tribal economy is the type of parasitism present. In a tribal economy limited to subsistence agriculture, parasitism is a mutual obligation. Every person in the tribe is free to make demands on his tribal members. Subsistence living is a system of mutual obligations. A more sophisticated form of this was developed in medieval times. This enabled some specialization. It has to be understood that the issue with parasitism is the impact it has on specialization. All progress is due to specialization. The highest form of specialization is found in a complex economy. To date, the complex economy has not been understood. Yet the fundamentals are very simple. If a high degree of free riding exists, the economy will deteriorate and move closer to the level of subsistence. If parasitism is opposed, even in the way it was during medieval times, a greater degree of specialization and therefore, civilization is possible. To understand the problem, we only need to think of someone who brings home a bucket of water. What could be simpler? The water belongs ostensibly to the one who carried it unless this is compensation for the work someone does making dinner or tending to the farm. Then the various occupations can be exchanged informally, that is without the intrusion of regulations or monetary systems. But what if the person who carries the water does not own the bucket? The owner of the bucket may demand half of all water carried in his bucket. This is the essence of capitalism, in which the owner of assets controls access to capital whilst the laborer must sell his labor. If the bucket was owned by the water carrier but purchased by means of a loan, we would face the same issues, but the situation would be looked at quite differently. If the bucket was purchased by a loan of $50 and the carrier of the water had to pay $10 a week interest, this would be considered usury, especially if the loan could not be paid off for months if ever. But we have no problem with rent or profiteering thought. Precisely the same conditions apply. It is argued that the capitalist invests his money in an operation. He takes the risk, so the gains ought to belong to him. But going back to the scenario with the bucket, no one would keep giving another person half of everything he produced or even $10 a week without some level of coercion. In a subsistence economy, we see all members of the tribe available to be called on to help the tribe or an individual member. But when the state enters the picture, this parasitism becomes unidirectional. In a regulated economy, there are intersectional favorites who are permitted to freeload off groups with lower intersectional value. When the lord is the regulating authority, as it was in the medieval period, it can be hard on those without much intersectional value, as the serfs. Democracy gave more power to the lower levels. First it was to the property owner, and over time, everyone was given the vote, and we ended up with something closer to the subsistence economy. However, it all hinged on how the government regulated the economy. However, the above is nothing more than a rough descriptive history of the economy. From this we get an understanding of how it works operationally, but we are still left with the problem of parasitism. Understanding the economy means understanding parasitism, because this is the central feature of the complex economy. If it were not, the economy would have shut it down. There are only two fundamental choices in this world: we either pay our way or we do not. If we do not, we are parasites. If we are parasites, we are freeloading. This is simple enough, but there is a problem, because in a complex economy a large degree of specialization is required, and it is not compatible with high levels, comparatively speaking, of freeloading. It's the old story of the bucket owner and the water carrier. We have remarked there are two ways to freeload. One can claim assets and control access to them through direct rent or inverse rent. Direct rent is when the owner rents the asset, whether this is a bucket, car, house, or other asset. Inverse rent is when the owner of capital rents the user, as in hiring labor to use the asset. The normal person works to add value to an asset. He may farm the land or modify stone, metal or water to produce something that has a greater use value to others. The worker adds value to an asset by adding labor. This gives us the labor theory of value. But modern economists tell us this does not give us a clear idea of the price of things, because it does not factor in the value added by capital. But before we look at this claim, remember we have proposed that there are only two avenues to walk down. It is either that we produce value by our labor or we freeload. We have also said that it is difficult to free ride for any length of time without a powerful state defending your crime, which makes it a criminal conspiracy. Subsistence cultures gives everyone an equal right to free ride for a time. There is reciprocity. It is a strategy to help people through hard times more than a ploy to avoid working. The Middle Ages kept the reciprocity, but by this time the system was looking something along the lines of a protection racket. The peasants were protected by the lord, but the source of risk was mostly from their lord or someone identical to him. When we said we either exploit others or pay our own way, it was based on a more fundamental truth. We get resources or we die. The work or freeload is a response to the need we have for resources in order to live. Some live by their wits and others by their labor. The lazy call the process letting money work for you. In truth, it is exploiting the cruelties of a system that makes it impossible for a person to acquire resources without first acquiring a particular product called currency. It is no longer a fact that if one does not work, neither shall he eat. The principle is if a man cannot find a way to acquire units of currency, he shall not be permitted to live. But the bottom line is people not only need property, they want it, and this system is ideally situated to permit the most ruthless to acquire it without working. But there is one other problem that faces us all. We cannot get what does not exist. This has been the biggest problem humanity faces. It is easy to share a pie once the ingredients have been produced and the pie formed and baked. But who is to do the work? A complex economy is a system that has achieved a balance between the freeloader and labor. The powerful have learned not to kill the golden goose. Third world nations are those countries that cannot wait for the pie to finish baking nor for the crust to even be rolled before consumption begins. The poor nations eat off the principal and so get little in the way of dividends. One has to invest to see an increase. One can have all the guns in the world, but if one has not given the people without guns the means to live, work and produce property, there will not be much to acquire. The complex economy is an uneasy truce between the scammers and the producers. The parasites are standing around the nest waiting for the next golden egg to drop. But the issue is always how much of what labor produces must they reinvest to keep labor productive. How much of what labor produces can they skim off without destroying motivation? To understand the economy requires we understand graft and how it works to systematically alienate labor from what it earns, without causing a revolution. Society is a complex criminal conspiracy designed to systematically skim property from those who produce it, at a level and rate that maximizes return on investment, ROI, over time. Another way of thinking about this is how little can one return to labor without invoking a rebellion? The complex economy has the strategies and policies that keeps the graft within limits and yet at a rate that tends to maximize ROI. The question for labor is, do we need their protection and are the benefits received worth the cost?